All right, let's face it, you don't need to increase your SAT score. All you have to do is stop losing those SAT points. Okay, 99% of students don't understand this, and that is why they're killing their score in these three ways. The first one, though, is stupidly easy to fix in just 5 minutes on test day. The second one takes a week, and the third one, for most people, will make or break their dream score when the pressure is on. All right, so first off, let's address how do you get those easier points back, because this is really the most crucial thing. Okay, of all the sections, this is where you can get the most points back, because if you miss an easy question on the SAT, you actually lose more points. This is what I'm talking about. You don't have to increase your score by getting 10 difficult questions right. You just need to not get that easy question right, because that's going to come back and bite you. Okay, these are free points, and basically all you have to do is be super careful in module 1. Okay, for most people, if you're not even scoring at where your target score is, you could be scoring in the low 1000s and still finish module 1 with like 20-30 minutes left. Okay, it's objectively easier than module 2, and that's why most people rush it. If you finish early, go back and do all the questions 3 to 5 times. Okay, don't just check your answer. You need to redo the questions, go through the process again, and actively review, because that's going to stop you from making those careless mistakes, which will come back and kill your score. Okay, another way is to module 1, if you are stuck on a question for some reason, just mark it. It's module 1. You don't need to be stressing over it, because another thing we're going to be talking about is performance anxiety. Okay, but this point primarily does go back to module 2. If you find a hard question, just mark it and come back, because if you run out of time, guess what? All those questions that you didn't solve, those are tons of points you're leaving on the table. But on module 1, if you do get stuck, what happens? Well, you need to calm down, okay? Because this is what we call the performance anxiety curve. This red part you see here is what happens when you finish early on module 1 and you don't do anything. You just lay there, right? You're pretty much inactive. And we don't have that optimal, or at least some stress on your brain, you will perform worse, right? You perform the best when there is some stress. If you get too much stress, that tipping point where, let's say you're like running out of time on module 1, well, then you're gonna be super stressed. And when module 2 comes around, that's gonna put you in a doozy, all right? So now let's talk about those medium points, right? Those 20-30 points. How do you get those back? Well, it's all about your prep. Your prep matters so much, okay? But it's not about prepping for 10,000 hours. It's just knowing how to prep smarter by doing a couple nuances and some couple key things. The first is to create a formula and concept dump sheet. Okay, so the night before the test, I've talked about this before. If there's any concepts that you were unsure of in practice while you're doing practice problems, make sure you note those down on this dump sheet, right? And address those issues before you go into test day not feeling confident about it. And if there's any small things like trap words or vocab stuff, or any types of questions that you want to keep note of, formulas, anything, put it down on this and try and replicate the sheet when you get on module 1, right? If you finish module 1 early, a great way to productively use your time is to create a dump sheet so that you can prepare for module 2, whether that be for the math section or just small vocab, grammar things you want to remember for module 2 English. So another thing during practice, when you're actually doing the questions, is try to make connections, right? If you get something wrong, ask yourself, why was this answer wrong, right? Was there a specific trap you fell for? Really keep these thoughts down, like literally write them down in a journal or track them somewhere. More small things, drink water. Water is good for you, and always try and stay positive, of course, because at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal. It's just the freaking SAT, so just do your best on it. All right, now we're getting into the hard points, right? Because if you get stuck on a question, like legitimately stuck, it doesn't really matter how much your prep does, right? It's just luck, except it's not luck. If you're stuck between 2 answer choices, I'm telling you, your preparation and the things you choose to work on will be the deciding factor. Here's just a quick example. If you have an English question, say one answer choice is emphasizes contrast, another one is offers rebuttal. And you're like, okay, well, from my prep, I remember, something like rebuttal might be too harsh because it's one of those extreme answer choices. And the SAT loves, kids picking answers with like all or never, just those really extreme things. So you go with the other answer choice and you end up getting it right. That could be the difference. Like if that was a hard question, you might get 10 points from that. But that's the difference between, if you're aiming for 1500, difference between 1490 and 1500, okay? So basically, you want to train your logic so that luck leans in your favor when it matters most. And I love this diagram as the power law distribution. if you just do normal prep, right? Like if you just spend like 2,000 hours prepping, you're gonna get something like the normal distribution, just poorly spent resources. But if you spend your resources, that being your time and effort, well, guess what? Your results will be proportional to the amount of effort you actually put in, right? In some cases, it is even greater than that, like exponential. It's been quite a ride, but since I've started doing SAT questions, I've in fact done 98% of all the hard questions available in the SAT Educator Question Bank. There's like 3,000 questions in there. And also, I've done over 1,200 SAT questions on Khan Academy. And from all those questions, I've learned two key principles that you absolutely must know to be able to solve any type of question. Okay, so what exactly are these principles? Well, the first one is what we call schema activation. Okay, that's just a whole bunch of buzzwords. Like, what does that actually mean? Basically, it just boils down to being able to recognize the problem type, because if you've done like addition or subtraction or multiplication for those means, if I said 4 times 5, you would instantly know it. And that's because you've done so much repetition, right? Your brain gets to a point where you can instantly recognize the type of problem as computational, something that's more abstract, right? You need to apply that same concept to the SAT. The SAT has templates for its questions, right? These are what we call our core problem archetypes, and they will take variations of these, changing numbers and all that. But the core fundamental is you need to understand what type of question it is, right? Because if you understand what type of question it is, you'll understand the steps you need to take to solve it. The steps that you take to solve a problem is different for everybody. And so as long as you figure that out in advance to actually gain that question on test day, you will be set. Okay, so here is a quick example, right? Both of these questions, if 2x plus 3 equals 9 was the value of 6x minus 1 in that word problem on the right, these are both labeled as the same type of question by College Board, right? Linear equations in one variable. How someone might approach their schema in solving these questions will differ, right? On the left side, someone could instantly solve that pretty quickly with Desmos. On the right side, there's tons of different methods that you could actually use. And so it's all based upon the steps that you choose to take that work for you. All right, let's talk about flow state real quick. It meshes really well with preparing for the SAT. Stop trying to memorize the steps, right? To actually find your schema and those steps that work for you, try and find similar questions. Not only are those similar questions inadvertently maybe going to be the same types of steps or same types of templates that you have to work with, but even if they're in the same realm, right, you can find similarities between these different questions, and then when you get something super complicated on the SAT, you're going to be set for that. And this is just the idea of flow state. It's pretty simple. It's basically like you don't want to be super challenged, right, where you feel like, oh, I got no chance of how to do this, but then you don't want to be super easy. You just want it just above your ability so that your brain feels challenged. You're actually able to grow. And that's exactly what you want to do on the SAT, to be able to grow and increase your performance, okay? So with that in mind, let's talk about the second principle, which is answer choice anticipation. This one's super simple. If you get a multiple choice question, instead of chopping between the answers, right? Like, oh, is this the correct answer? Or is this the correct answer? And now you're confused, right? Come up with some sort of answer. It doesn't even have to be the actual answer before you look at the answer choices. A rough value, right? If you're doing math, or maybe if it's English, a great strategy is to take out a piece of paper and write out a dummy answer, a phrase, logic, anything that helps you look at your own thinking, see what you already come up with, and then compare that thinking to the existing answer choices, and then find the best match. Okay, that's going to help you not fall into those traps that the SAT makers of those questions, they know exactly how to create questions that will make you fail and pick the wrong answer. And some more specific tips to the sections on math. Don't just solve the question immediately, right? Do stuff like back solving, estimating, plugging answers in, whatever. English, don't just reread the entire paragraph. You're not going to get any new content from that. Really focusing on the small nuances, tone shifts, the functions of the paragraphs, like what do they actually mean? And then any areas with tons of evidence that you can really zone in on, look at it and see if the text supports your answer choices. And something you can do as well is to just take out a bunch of multiple choice questions, cover up the answer choices, and then don't look at them until you've come up with your prediction answer. It doesn't even have to be the real answer there. Last thing here for the English section is to know to think objectively, right? When you have different types of systems of thinking, there's this research that's done on it, system 1 versus system 2. Basically, if you're being rational and objective, right, it clears you more of the emotion that might come from open-ended evaluations, And while, open-endedness and creativity might be good in other sectors of life, on the SAT, it's super crucial that you don't dabble in that nature simply to not get yourself more confused. This is a picture of a pyramid. And this is the sole reason why your SAT score is below a 1500 right now. Okay? That's crazy, I know. What does a pyramid have to do with your SAT score? Well, it actually boils down to something quite simple. All right? And that is building your foundation. Okay, now I'm not talking about going back and doing addition, subtraction, like elementary school stuff, right? That is not what the foundation we're talking about. And for many of you, maybe you have great fundamentals, okay? And this will explain it right here. All right, let's see what is exactly wrong right now that's preventing you from getting your dream score or getting your target score. First off, if you're scoring under 1,000, you have true foundational gaps, right? Like you grew up and you went through the education system and there were things that you were just not taught. Okay, now that you're taking the SAT, you're going to have to go back and revisit those concepts, right? Actually learn them from scratch. Now, if you're someone who's scoring between 1,000 and 1,300, you have an inconsistent foundation. That means when you learn certain concepts, it was very spotty, right? It was very shaky. Maybe your teacher taught you a very formulatic way, taught you to a test, a state exam, whatever. But now you're screwed because you got the SAT, right? But you just go back, brush up on those concepts. There's tons of videos on YouTube covering the actual content for that topic that you definitely want to go back on. But for tons of you out there who are watching this video, you are stuck. All right, you are stuck between the 1,300 and the 1,500 SAT range. This score bracket is very frustrating, especially if you're in the 1,400s, because as you go up, it is harder, progressively more difficult to improve your SAT score because the margins get more slim. All right, like at the top, if you're missing like 1 or 2 questions, you're gonna get docked tons of points, right? Versus if you start off with like 1,000 SAT score, you could just not do anything. You could play video games all night. The very next day, take the SAT and jump up 100 points, right? That doesn't work if you're scoring like a 1350. You're not going to magically score 1450 the next day, all right? So what is the secret sauce that if you're scoring under 1,500 SAT, but you're scoring above 1,300 SAT, what do you need to do in order to score a 1,500 SAT? Well, it's actually kind of simple, okay? And I have 2 questions that will demonstrate this. You see this question? This is a very common SAT question. Okay, there are some questions that are a bit easier than this. I should say much easier than this on Module 1. But most questions that you get that might cause you some difficulty or something along those lines, this is the most common type of question you're going to see on the SAT, right? Not this exact type of problem, but this sort of difficulty, pretty straightforward for some people depending on your skill level, right? But the point is, for questions like these, right, where it's not like groundbreaking, OMG, I've never seen this, solve 10 of these questions for every one of these questions you solve. Now, maybe this isn't the most crazy question you've ever seen. You've done something harder. But my point is, for every one of those crazy hard SAT questions that you solve, you should be solving 10 of the easy medium questions. Okay? And why is this? Well, this is because the SAT is mainly consisted of those easy and medium questions. Okay? And this is where we get into the idea of the SAT dip. Okay? If you are still making mistakes on the simpler questions in Module 1, and even in Module 2, there are easy, I want to say easy classified by College Board, but in comparison to the types of difficult questions you might see or practice for, there are some pretty medium difficulty questions in the beginning of Module 2 Math or Module 2 English, right? So, because of that, if you are making mistakes on those sections, you should not be training for the hardest questions ever, or just going on YouTube searching up the hardest SAT questions. By solving those questions, it makes you feel good. Okay, it basically feeds your ego because you're solving the hardest questions, right? And if you happen to get one of them right, it makes you feel good. You feel like you're accomplished. You feel like you're learning. You feel like you're preparing for something hard. Versus the boring stuff, the stuff that's not as flashy or sexy, right? Actually just sitting down and like doing the monotonous, repetitive problems. But doing that, the action of doing that will make sure that you do not miss those questions on test day. And the majority of the SAT exam are those questions. Okay, the SAT is scaled. So if you miss something like an easy medium question, right, you can lose more points than if you miss something that was a hard question classified by College Board. And this diagram perfectly sums it up. Okay, if you're doing those monotonous problems, and I should say this actually, if you're doing those monotonous problems, you're actually getting to the point of diminishing returns. Right, this is diminishing returns, monotonous problems. If you're actually learning the concepts, that is essentially the fundamental, most productive way to actually increase your score alongside test taking strategies. If you're grinding the most difficult questions while you still are missing those simpler questions, that is negative returns. That is hurting your score. That is why you are under a 1500 SAT. Okay? So, another thing, this is the last caveat here before we end the video, is talking about pretest questions. These are experimental questions that the SAT puts in because they want data, right? They want to see, is this question hard? Is this question medium? Most of the time, they're going to be pretty hard because they're like new concepts that they just like put in a blender and mix up, and it's something crazy, right? So because of that, these pretest questions are more likely to be hard. So if you get a question on the SAT that you're stuck on, it's probably a pretest question, don't waste your time on it. And that's exactly why you shouldn't be spending your time on these crazy questions. You don't have to get all the hard questions correct in order to get 1500 SAT. The only point that you should be focusing on strictly these hard questions is if you meet these following criteria. You're not making any mistakes on Module 1. If you do make mistakes on Module 2, you're not making the same mistakes from practice test to practice test. It's very important that you go through and review your practice tests. And also if you happen to finish Module 2 early consistently, and you're finding that you're actually stuck in those 1 or 2 hard questions afterwards that you review, then that is a signal that you should probably be focusing on strictly the hard questions. And also, if you're subscribed to PrepWorks, I'm going to be coming out with tons of more SAT and college admissions videos in the future. You definitely do not want to miss those. I'll catch you guys in the next video.